So, your new bike from Trials Superstore just arrived. Well, if you're like me, when I got my first Trials bike, I didn't know a whole lot about bike maintenance or putting bikes together, and all the videos online seem to be at professional bike shops with all the right tools. So I'm making this video to show you how you can easily put together the bike with only a multi-tool. Everything in the box included from trialsuperstore.com. Now, I have to give a disclaimer that I'm not a professional mechanic, but I hope this video answers some of your questions about the process. Please don't hesitate to contact me or Trials Superstore with any questions you might have. For reference, the only tools I needed to build this bike were Allen or hex keys size 5, 6, and 8, and a T25 Torx wrench. The stem was installed upside down to fit in the box, so here I'm taking off the stem. You have to first loosen the side bolts and then unscrew the top cap like so. Just flip it upside down, screw the top cap in, and then the side bolts. I just did them hand tight for now because I'll need to take it off again later. To put the handlebars on, unscrew these bolts holding the stem clamp on. Make sure these guide marks are facing out where you can see them through the stem clamp. If you don't fully unscrew the stem clamp bolts, you can just slide the handlebars in, which can make it easier. Align the crosshairs in the center and tilt it to your preference. Importantly, when screwing the stem clamp bolts back on, tighten them diagonally across from each other to avoid stress on the handlebars. If you don't have a torque wrench, tighten these fairly tight with a multi-tool, but not too tight. Longer tools will have a different leverage ratio, so be careful. For the front brake, select the shorter cable of the two, which has already been cut to length. Unscrew these two bolts on the lever. If you have Magura levers, I like to tighten the top bolt fully, and then tighten the bottom one. However, only tighten the bottom one a little bit. It's important that the levers can slide around on the handlebars like this in case of a crash. The front brake is the trickiest part of the whole process if you want to route it through the steer tube, this hole right here. The inspired top cap has a hole in it so that you can route through the steer tube. This allows for many foot jumps and bar spins. If any fluid leaks from the brake during this process, you may have to bleed it, which is a longer process that I will link to in the description. Also, you have to be very careful not to let the oil anywhere near your rotor or pads or it will contaminate them. Use isopropyl alcohol to wipe down any trace of oil. Worst case scenario, bleeding the brakes isn't as hard as it sounds. You just need a $20 kit that you can order online. Again, check out the description of this video for links to resources on this topic. You're done routing through the steer tube, so tighten the top cap bolt. This is not like a normal bolt, you only tighten this one until there's no play in the headset. Play is felt by rocking the fork back and forth within the frame. You always tighten the top cap first and the stem bolts second. Tighten each of these a little bit at a time. These should be about the same tightness as the stem clamp bolts. Should be about the same force as it takes to pick up a 4 or 5 pound weight. It's always better to under tighten than to over tighten. You can fix loose bolts, but not damaged parts. Once you've routed the brake cable, or not, just a matter of finding the right screws and screwing the brake caliper onto the frame like so. In general, make sure your tool is fully inserted into the bolt, and make sure the thread is going in straight. It can be a tricky position to reach with a multi-tool like this, but it's worth it if the bike shops have a 3-week wait. I like to zip tie the brake cable to the frame here because it can sometimes rub on the tire. Next up is the rear brake. Repeat the same process for the lever. The brake cable simply routes through the back of the frame like so. Follow the frame cable guides. Tighten the caliper, but it can be helpful to not tighten either caliper all the way for adjustment with the rotor later. These cable guide clamps are hard to pull apart, but you just snap them on. Pretty simple. Next up, grab your wheels. Take a rotor out of this package, but be careful. Don't touch the outer edge of the rotor, it may contaminate it. Pick it up carefully by the middle. The side with the writing on it should face outwards, towards you on the wheel. Find this package with your rotor bolts, and carefully screw each of them in hand tight. 6 bolts to a rotor. Use a T25 tool to tighten them until they're mostly flush with the rotor. Similar to the stem clamp bolts, you must tighten rotor bolts on the opposite side of each other. Tighten one, and then tighten the other on the opposite side. Tighten these about as hard as you can with a multi-tool's low leverage. They have a habit of coming loose on Trials bikes. Once you're done with one wheel, do the exact same for the other wheel. I borrowed a longer tool here to screw these in faster than I could with a multi-tool. Time to put the wheels on. Some grease is always a good idea for some of the other bolts on the bike as well. Bike shops sell grease and they might lend you some as well. Worst case scenario, I have built bikes without grease before, it's just not recommended. Aim for the brake rotor to fit in the brake caliper nicely. Just wiggle the wheel around until it fits in and then slide the axle in. This bolt screws into the other side of the axle. Check the bike assembly guide for the proper torque. I decided to use this longer tool, but you could also just really crank down on a multi-tool. Same thing for the rear wheel. The Fourplay has this insert on the other side of the rear axle. Make sure they're lined up and then tighten it in. Notice that it tightens anti-clockwise. Inspired provides a reference sheet with the bike detailing this information. If your bike came with this expansion wedge, it screws into the other side of the dropout. Tighten it about the same tightness as the stem clamp bolts and stem bolts. Now that the wheels are secured, you want to align the rotors with the calipers. Hold the brake and rock the bike back and forth, moving the wheel. And with one finger held on the brake, tighten the calipers in the position they're in. This should align them perfectly centered with the rotor. I like to pump up my tires to 40 to 50 psi for street riding, but you could try 30 if you want cushion for learning tricks. Last up is the chain. Find the chain tensioner and its 2 bolts and tighten it onto the frame. Keep it loose so that you can adjust it. Looking from the back of the bike, you want to make sure the tensioner is perfectly in line with the rear cog. Tighten the bolts down once they form a straight line. Lay the chain over the cogs and through the frame. Make sure you go under and through the frame like so. The chain was already cut to length and has these 2 pieces that interlock. Fit them together like so. Wrap the chain around the tensioner. Then flip the bike upright. Make sure the chain link you put together is in an open part of the chain. Step down hard on the pedal and you should hear a click of the chain link snapping into place. Last step is the pedals. Don't forget these spacers that were provided attached to the cranks. Pedals tighten in different directions, so make sure you pay attention to the markings labeled left and right. The way I remember it is, for each pedal inserted you should be screwing forwards and down towards the floor. My pedals have also come loose a lot on Trials bikes, so you really want to tighten these down hard. As you can see in this video, the left pedal screws in the other direction, but still towards the front wheel as I like to call it. I like to sit on the bike and put all my force into tightening the pedals because I've had issues with them in the past. You should definitely check the pedals often during your first few rides, and continue checking them every now and then. I hope this video was helpful, and check out my channel if you want to see me riding the inspired Fourplay. As always, comment if you have any questions at all.